They read my father's will in the front parlor, while I sat in the kitchen with the door standing open. My name came up one time, in the paragraph about the household linens. I had kept that man's books for 20 years, and signed his name to every page of them, with his blessing and 2 witnesses in the room. And before the supper dishes were dried, my younger brother had explained to me, kindly, the way you explain weather to a child, exactly what a woman gets for that. 9 months later, I stood in a bank office in Kessel City with those same books under my arm, and when I opened them on the table, one of my brothers walked out of that room owning nothing at all. Before we go on, tell me in the comments where you are listening from tonight. It always amazes me how far these stories travel, and I read every single one. Now settle in, because this took me from the first week of April in 1893 to the first Monday in December of that same year, and there is not one day of it I have been able to set down since. It did not begin in that parlor. It began, if I am honest with you, with a hand. My father was Junius Ordway, and he owned the sawmill at the bend of the Kessel River where the town of Ludworth sits, in the middle of the state of Michigan, 40 miles from anything you would call a city. The mill had his name on the office door and on the boiler and on 11 flat cars that went south twice a week when times were good. It said Ordway and Sons. There were 2 sons. There was also me, and I had been in that office since I was 27 years old, which is when my husband died and I came home with a baby on my hip and no money of my own. In the spring of 1882, my father had a stroke of apoplexy in the yard between the burner and the drying sheds, and when Dr. Pettibone was finished with him a week later, the right side of him worked well enough to walk and to eat and to be a terror to everybody in his employ. But his right hand was done. It would hold a fork if you were patient with it. It would not hold a pen. And a man who owns a mill in a lumber county signs his name 40 times a week, on bills of lading, on drafts, on payslips, on mortgage renewals, on every scrap of paper that turns standing trees into money. So he called me into the office on a Tuesday morning in June, with Amos Kettering there, who was his lawyer and the notary for the whole county, and Dr. Pettibone standing by the window with his hat in his hands. And my father said, in that new, slow way he had of talking then, that from that day forward his daughter Verna would write his name for him, and that these 2 gentlemen were to remember he had said it. Mr. Kettering wrote out a paper about it and had me sign my own name at the bottom, my real one, Verna Halloway, and then had me write my father's name underneath so there would be a specimen of it on file. I remember thinking it was a great deal of ceremony over a pen. I was 36 years old, and I thought a pen was a small thing. For 11 years after that, the signature on every paper that left the Ordway mill was mine. Everybody in Ludworth knew it. The lumber buyers in Saginaw knew it, and one of them used to say he could tell an Ordway draft across a room because the capital J was prettier than old Junius deserved. My brothers knew it best of all, because for 11 years, when either of them wanted money, they came to me, and I wrote the name and I handed it over. That is the thing I need you to hold on to, not the mill, not the money, the hand. Now let me show you what our life was before that April, because I want you to see it the way I saw it, which is to say as something solid, a thing that had been standing so long it never occurred to me it could be knocked down. The house was on Bell Street, on the rise above the mill, white clapboard with a deep porch across the front, and a kitchen L that my mother had made my father build in '71, the year before she died. In the morning I was up at 4:30, because the mill whistle went at 5:30, and my father liked his breakfast before it. Nell Quill, who had come into that house as a girl of 27 in 1869 and never left it, would already have the stove going, and the two of us would work that kitchen in a silence it had taken us 30 years to learn. We had our order, the three of us. My father took his coffee black and so hot it should have taken the skin off, and he took it in a china cup with a gold band that had been my mother's, because it was the only tenderness he allowed himself where anybody could see it. I sat at his right and cut his meat for him, and it took us 3 years to be able to do that without either of us saying anything about it. My daughter Sylvie came down last, always last, with her hair not done and a book under her arm. And my father, who did not tolerate lateness from any man on his payroll, would push the sugar toward her without looking up. "There is my girl," he would say. "There is my grandfather," she would say back, and kiss the top of his head, and he would growl at her like a dog that wanted its ears rubbed. If you had asked me in March of '93 what I owned, I would have told you I owned that. At 6, I walked down the hill to the office with my father on my arm, past the drying sheds where the boards were stacked in tiers with the sticks between them, and the smell came up off them, and that smell is the smell of my whole life. Green pine cut in the winter and sweating out the spring. Steam and sawdust and the tar they put on the belts. The office was 2 rooms. My father had the front one with the window on the yard, so he could watch the carriage and see for himself when a man was slow. I had the back one, with the safe and the long table and the shelf where the books stood in a row, 11 of them, one for every year since his stroke, bound in that pebbled black cloth with the red corners. I can tell you now, sitting here, what the mill paid for Babbitt metal in June of '87, because I wrote it down, and a thing you write with your own hand at a table by a window stays in you in a way that a thing you only read does not. My older brother Merritt ran the mill itself. He was 52 that year, a heavy, quiet man who wore his collar buttoned in July, and he had one great gift, which was that men worked for him without being shouted at. He came into my office twice a day, at 7 and at 4, and he would stand with his hat in his hand, even though it was his own family's office, and he would say the numbers to me, and I would write them down. Board feet cut, cars loaded, men out sick. In 11 years, he never once sat down in my office. I used to think that was respect. My younger brother Foy was 41, and he was the one people liked. I want to be fair to him, because it would be easy now to make him a villain from the first page, and he was not that, not at the beginning. He was funny. He had our mother's face, and he could walk into a room where 2 men had been arguing for an hour and have them both laughing inside of 5 minutes. And that is worth money in a business where you buy standing timber off farmers who do not want to sell it. He wore a ring on his little finger with a green stone in it, and he was in Detroit a great deal. And in the good years, nobody asked what he did there. There were signs. I am going to give them to you plainly now, and you will see them, because you are sitting outside my life and looking in at it, which is the only place from which any of this is ever plain. In November of '92, Foy came into my back room at 9 at night, which he had never done, and asked me where the drafts were kept. He said he only wanted to see how one was worded. I gave him one and watched him look at it a while, and he turned it over and studied the back of it, the endorsement line, and he said, "You write a fine hand, Verna. You always did." Then he set it down and went out, and I thought nothing of it because he had been telling me pleasant things since he was 4 years old. In January, my father began having Mr. Kettering out to the house on Saturdays. That in itself was not strange. They had been friends 40 years, and they played cribbage. But Nell told me that twice they had gone into the front room and shut the door. and that once she had carried in the coffee and both of them stopped talking, and that my father had a paper under his hand on the table and did not move it until she had gone out again. I asked him about it that night. He was in his chair with the lamp turned low and his bad hand curled in his lap the way it did when he was tired. "You and Amos are thick as thieves," I said. "What is it you are cooking up?" "Nothing that concerns you," he said. "It is only that Nell says you shut the door." He looked at me for what seemed a long time. My father had pale eyes, and by then the left one wandered a little when he was worn out, so it was hard to hold his gaze and be certain you had it. "I have been an old fool about a thing," he said at last. "I am seeing to it. When it is seen to, I will tell you, and you will be angry with me for a week, and then it will be done." "That is not an answer," I said. "It is the only one you are getting tonight, and you will bring me my tea." I brought him his tea. That is the whole of it. He told me he had been an old fool about a thing, and I brought him his tea, and I did not ask again. Not in January, not in February, and by the second week of April he was dead, and I had spent 4 months not asking. He died the way that kind of man dies, which is to say badly and with a great deal of temper. He took cold at the end of March, standing out in the rain to see about a boiler, and it went down into his lungs, and Dr. Pettibone came and went for 11 days, and finally stopped putting a face on it. On the 10th day, my father made me sit by the bed and take the china cup with the gold band down off the shelf and hold it where he could see it. And he said, "Your mother would have had this settled 20 years ago. She had a head on her." On the 11th day, early, he said something to Merritt that I did not hear, because I had gone down to see about the water heating, and by the time I came back up the stairs with the pitcher, my brother was standing at the window with his back to the bed, and my father was gone. We buried him on the Friday. Half the county came, because he had employed a good part of it, and Reverend Bracken said the things that get said, and the men from the mill stood along the fence in their good clothes, with their hats off and their hair combed wet. And when it was over, they went back and started the saws again, because the yard had 11 cars promised south, and the river was up, and nobody, my father least of all, would have wanted it any other way. And then it was Monday, and Mr. Kettering came out to the house at 2 in the afternoon with his case under his arm, and my brothers were in the parlor with him, and I was in the kitchen with Nell cutting up a ham that a neighbor had sent over, and nobody came to the kitchen door to get me. I heard the parlor door close. I heard the murmur of Mr. Kettering reading, that flat voice men use for documents, going on and on with a pause here and there. I stood with the knife in my hand and listened to it and thought, well, they will call me in a moment. There will be some part of it about the house. Nell had stopped working. She was at the sink with her back to me and her hands down in the water, and she was not moving them. "Verna," she said without turning around. "Hush," I said. "It is nothing. It is business." The reading went on the better part of half an hour. Then chairs were pushed back, and there were men's voices at an ordinary pitch, and Mr. Kettering said something short in the hallway, and the front door opened and shut. And then Foy came into the kitchen with his coat over his arm, smiling the way he smiled when he had thought a thing over beforehand. "There you are," he said. "I told them you would be up to your elbows in that ham." "Nobody came for me," I said. "There was no need. It is all of it straightforward, and it is dry stuff for a Monday." He picked a piece of the ham off the board with his fingers and ate it. "Merritt and I take the mill in halves. The timberlands go with it. There is money set aside for Sylvie for when she marries, which is handsome of the old man, and I would call it more than handsome. And you have the house." "I have the house," I said. "You have the house for your lifetime, and your keep, and $20 a month for what the paper calls your personal use, and the linens and the plate, which Kettering read out solemn as a judge, and which very nearly finished me." He laughed. "The household linens. Can you imagine sitting through it?" The room did not go dark, and my legs did not give, and I did not faint, and I am sorry if that disappoints, because in my experience, the body does not always do the dramatic thing. What happened was that I became very aware of the knife. I set it down on the board and lined the handle square with the edge, and then I moved it another 1/4 inch so it was squarer still. And then I said, in a voice that sounded to me like it belonged to some other woman standing nearer the stove, "And the office?" Foy looked blank a second, and then he understood me, and he did a thing then that I have turned over a great many times since. He put his hand on my shoulder. "Verna," he said gently, "there is no office in a will. There is a mill and there are lands. You have been a great help to Father, and nobody is turning you out of anything. You will go on exactly as you are." He squeezed my shoulder once. "You are our sister. In this family, we do not count out shares like farmers along a fence line." Then he took another piece of the ham and went out through the front of the house, and I heard him whistling on the porch steps. And Nell Quill stood at that sink with her hands still down in the water, and neither of us said one word for a long time. That night I sat up in the kitchen after the house was quiet, and I did what I had done every night of my working life, which was to add. I have never been able to grieve properly with a column of figures in front of me. It is a defect in my character, and it has also been the only thing that ever kept me upright. $20 a month is $240 a year. Sylvie's shoes cost $4 and lasted her 7 months if she was careful, and she was not careful. And the money set aside for her, that handsome money Foy had called more than handsome, was set aside for when she married, which is to say, it belonged to a man neither of us had met yet. I want you to understand what stopped my breath at that table, because it was not the money. It was one clean sentence that came into my head, as if somebody else had said it out loud in the room, and the sentence was this: "They have made my daughter's whole life depend on a wedding." Sylvie came down at 11 in her nightgown with her hair in a plait over her shoulder. She was 22, and she had her father's long hands and my mother's chin, and she was clever in a way I have never been, quick where I am only thorough. "You did not come up," she said. "I am doing the April accounts." "You are sitting in front of the April accounts." She sat down across from me and pulled the lamp a little toward herself, which she knew I hated, and looked at my face for a while. "Nell told me. Nell should keep her mouth shut." Nell has kept her mouth shut for 24 years, and she is tired of it. She put her hand flat on the page, so I could not go on pretending to read it. "The household linens, Mother." It is a form of words. Lawyers put in the linens, so the will cannot be picked apart afterward. "Then let them put in the linens and give you the office." She said it flat, without heat, the way she said everything. "You do the work, Uncle Merritt runs the yard, and Uncle Foy runs about the state being charming, and you do the work. Everybody in Ludworth knows it. Mr. Dorrance at the bank knows it, because when he wants a thing settled, he writes to you and not to them." "Mr. Dorrance writes to me because I answer letters," I said. "Your uncles do not." That is what I said. I told her to go to bed. She went and stopped in the doorway the way she had done since she was small, when she wanted the last word without a quarrel over it. "You should have been in that parlor," she said. "You should have made them come and get you." She went up. I sat there another hour, and here is what I decided, and I have had a long time to be ashamed of it. I decided that the will was a piece of paper written by a proud old man who did not like to think about dying, and that the work was the work, and that the work was mine, and that on Tuesday morning I would go down that hill at 6 o'clock, the same as I had gone down it for 11 years, and everything would settle back into its shape. And on Tuesday morning I did, and for 3 weeks it very nearly did. Merritt came in at 7 with his hat in his hand. Board feet cut, cars loaded, 2 men out with the grip. He said nothing about the will, and neither did I. Foy came in on the Thursday and asked me whether we could stand a new set of saw teeth, and I told him what we could stand, and he said, "You are worth the both of us, Verna," and went out again. The bills of lading came to my table. The pay slips came to my table. On the last Saturday in April, out of habit, I picked up the pen to sign the drafts and stopped with my hand in the air, because the name I had written for 11 years belonged to a dead man, and there was nobody left alive for me to sign for. That was the first time it went through me properly. Not in the kitchen with the ham, not with my daughter at the lamp. There, with the pen in my hand and the sunlight coming in on the long table and the smell of the drying sheds coming through the window, I understood that a thing had ended. I put the pen down. I went to the front room and told Merritt the drafts wanted signing, and he came back with me and sat in my chair, at my table, and signed his own name 11 times, slowly, the way a man signs when he is not used to it, and he blotted each one and did not look at me. When he was done, he stood up and put the chair back exactly where he had found it, which I remember because it was the sort of consideration that costs nothing. "It will take some getting used to," he said. "It will. Father should have talked to you." He turned his hat over in his hands one full turn. "I told him he should talk to you." Now, I have gone back over that sentence more times than I can count. At the time, I heard it as a kindness. I heard my brother saying, "He should have warned you, and I am sorry." What he was actually telling me, if I had been listening with my eyes open, was that he had known what was in that will before it was read, and that he had known it long enough to have an argument with our father about it. The first strange thing happened in the second week of May. I keep my books in a certain way, and I do not apologize for it. Every ledger stands on the shelf with the year toward the room, and every ledger is closed on a strip of blotting paper at the last page written, and the strip sticks out a half-inch at the bottom so that I can open to my place in the dark if I have to. That is not tidiness for its own sake. That is a woman working by lamplight in a room where the stove smokes. On the 9th of May, I came in at 6, and the 89 book was standing with its spine reversed, the year turned to the wall. I stood and looked at it a while. A book gets pulled down and put back wrong. That is all that is. I took it down and opened it, and the blotter strip was in the right place, and the last entry was the last entry, and nothing was disturbed. I put it back the right way round and went on with my morning. 2 days later, the 91 book was reversed. Then, 4 days after that, the 89 again. I did not go to my brothers about it. Try to see the position from inside, because from outside it looks simple. I had been left the household linens, and every day I went into that office and did the work of it, on the tacit understanding that nobody would say out loud that I had no business there. To go to Merritt and say, "Somebody is handling my books at night," was to invite the answer, "They are not your books, Verna." And once a thing like that is said aloud, it can never be unsaid. So I did what women in my position have always done. I made a note of the dates, privately, in the back of my own household book, in pencil, where nobody would look. The 9th of May. The 11th. The 15th. The 20th. The 22nd. The second strange thing was Nell, and it came to me sideways, the way things come to you from a woman who has spent her life in service and has learned very carefully what she is allowed to have noticed. She was scouring the sink one evening at the end of May, and she said to the sink, "There is a light in the office at night now." "There is not," I said. "I lock it at 6. "There is a light in it," she said, "some nights, not every night. You can see it from the top of the back steps when you go out for the coal, and only from there because of the sheds." "Foy then," I said, "he keeps town hours." "Yes," said Nell, "that is what I thought too." And then she rinsed the sink and hung up the cloth and said nothing further, because she had said exactly as much as a woman in her place could say. I did nothing with it, and I want to keep saying that in this story, because I think there are women listening to me tonight who will know that particular kind of nothing. It is not stupidity. It is the arithmetic of what a quarrel costs against what a suspicion is worth. And the arithmetic was wrong, and I did it every day for 2 months. Then came June, and the country went out from under everybody at once. I do not know how much you know about that summer. The banks began to close in May, out west first, and then it came east like a fire in a hayfield, and the papers said the World's Fair would carry the country through. In our part of Michigan, it showed up in lumber. The Chicago yards stopped taking cars, not slowed, stopped. On the 14th of June, we had 4 cars loaded standing on the siding at Ludworth, with nowhere on earth to send them. And by the 20th, we had 11, and the yard began to look like a graveyard for boards. Merritt came in at 7 that whole month with his face getting grayer, and gave me his numbers, and I wrote them down, and the numbers were all going the wrong way. Men out sick, none, because a man does not stay home sick in a year when the mill is laying off. Board feet cut, down by half, then by 2/3. Cars loaded, and then a line through it, and then nothing at all. On the last day of June, Ransom Dorrance drove out from Kessel City in a hired rig with his clerk beside him, and he sat in my father's front room, which was Merritt's front room now, for 1 hour and 10 minutes. And then he came into my back office by himself, which is a thing I would like you to hold in your mind for later, because it tells you something about the man that I did not appreciate at the time. Mr. Dorrance was 58, small and dry, with spectacles that he took off whenever he intended to say something he meant. "Mrs. Halloway," he said, "do you keep the drafts book still?" "I keep all of them." "May I see it?" I gave it to him. He turned pages for a while with his spectacles off and held up close, and then he said, "Your father renewed the mortgage in 91 and again in 92. $11,400 secured against the mill, the yard, and the north timber. You will have seen the paper." "I wrote the paper," I said, "in his hand and my writing, with Mr. Kettering by." "Yes." He put the spectacles back on. "It falls due the first Monday in December. In an ordinary year, I would renew it over a cup of coffee and neither of us would think about it again. This is not going to be an ordinary year, and I am not going to be able to renew it on my own say-so. It will go to a meeting of the men who hold the paper with us, in my office, and they will want to see books." "Then they will see books," I said. "Mine are current to yesterday." He looked at me a moment. I did not know it then, but I had just said the only sentence in that room that mattered. "Mrs. Halloway," he said, "your brothers have told me the accounts are being reorganized. Should I understand that you are not to be applied to on these matters?" There it was. It was said politely, by a stranger, in my own office. And I had a choice in that second between the truth and my family. And I want you to know exactly what I chose. Because I chose my family. "You should understand that I am at your service, Mr. Dorrance," I said, "and that anything you want from these books, you may have from me the same day you ask for it." He nodded slowly and took up his hat. At the door, he stopped. "My father built his bank on the notion that a man's signature is the man," he said. "It has never once been true in 40 years, but we go on saying it." Then he went out and got into the rig with his clerk, and I stood at the window and watched him go down the hill past the sheds, and behind me on the shelf, the 11 books stood in their row, and one of them was turned with its year to the wall. July in a lumber town in a bad year is a thing I hope none of you ever see. The saws ran 3 days a week and then 2. Merritt let 11 men go on the 6th and 9 more on the 20th, and he did it himself, one at a time, in the yard with his hat off, because he would not do it from behind a desk. Whatever he did to me, he never once made another man take his bad news secondhand. The families started going out of Ludworth in wagons. You would see them on Bell Street in the early morning, with the household goods roped on and the children up on top of it. And by August, there were 4 empty houses on the mill side of town. Nell put up 30 quarts of beans that summer against a winter nobody could see the shape of. Sylvie took in the 2 Bracken girls 3 afternoons a week and taught them their sums for $1 a month. And I let her, and it cost me something to let her. And in the middle of all that, on the 11th of July, a letter came to the house for me from the Kessel County Bank, and it was not from Mr. Dorrance. It was from his clerk, a young man named Tobias Vane, and it was 4 lines long, and it changed everything I understood about my own family. Mr. Vane wrote that in preparing the schedule for the December meeting, the bank was assembling all Ordway paper then outstanding, and that as the mill's books were in my keeping, he begged leave to send me the list of drafts and notes the bank held or had discounted so that I might confirm them against the ledgers at my convenience. 4 sheets came with it, in a clerk's beautiful copper plate. Date, amount, drawer, endorsement, where presented, when paid. I took it into the back office at 6 the next morning, which was a Wednesday, and I laid the 4 sheets out on the long table in a row, and I took down the 91 and 92 books, and I began at the top and worked down, ticking each one off in pencil the way I have checked a list every week since I was 27 years old. For an hour it went beautifully. Every draft on Mr. Vane's list was in my book, in my hand, on the date he had, for the amount he had. There is a satisfaction in that which I do not expect anybody who has not done the work to understand. It is the same feeling as a door that latches on the first try. Then I came to a line on the second sheet, about 2/3 of the way down, and my pencil stopped. A draft for $600, drawn on the Ordway account, dated the 12th of March, 1892, presented at Kessel City on the 14th, paid. It was not in my book. I want to slow down here, because this is the place where my life divided, and because I have noticed that when people tell a story like this, they always jump to the shouting. There was no shouting. There was a woman of 47 in a wooden chair in a room that smelled of pine, with a pencil in her hand, going back to the top of the page to find where she had lost her place. I went through the whole of March '92 twice. Then I got up and closed the office door, which I had never done in 11 years, and came back and went through it a third time with a ruler laid under each line so I could not skip. There was no draft of $600 on the 12th of March in my book. There was nothing on the 12th of March at all. There was an entry on the 10th for $41.60 for shingles. There was an entry on the 16th. Between them, nothing. Because between them, I had not been in that office. On the 12th of March, 1892, I was in Grand Rapids, in a rented room over a milliner's shop on Ottawa Street, sitting up with my dead husband's sister, who had a growth in her and who took 9 days to die and did not want a nurse. She wanted family. I was gone from the 4th of March to the 19th. Sylvie went with me. My father wrote me 2 letters in that time, dictated to Nell, and signed with an X and a joke about the X, and I have them still. The keys to that safe went with me to Grand Rapids in my traveling bag, because they always went with me. Because my father had been particular about it after a boy in the Saginaw office got into a safe in '79. So I sat there in my chair and put my 2 hands flat on the table, and I said out loud to the empty room, "That is not mine." And then, because the mind will do anything at all rather than arrive where it is going, I spent the next hour building a house for that draft to live in. Perhaps I had written it in advance and dated it forward, which I have never done in my life. Perhaps a young man in a bank 40 miles away had copied the drawer's name out of the wrong column. I sat with that for an hour. Then I went and got my hat. It is 9 miles to the Crossroads store at Aldenbrook, where the Kessel City stage stops, and I did not have a horse to spare in July of that year, and I walked it. I walked it in the heat with those 4 sheets folded inside my shirtwaist against my skin. And I got the noon stage, and I was standing in front of Tobias Vane's window in that cool marble bank with my shoes ruined at 3. He was 26 or so, with ink on his second finger, and he was frightened of me, which I did not understand until later. "I want to see the 12th of March draft," I said. 92, $600. "Mrs. Halloway, I ought to ask Mr. Dorrance." "Then ask him." He went away and came back with Mr. Dorrance, who looked at me a moment and then said, "Bring it," and took me into a room behind the counter with a table in it and a window with wire in the glass. The draft came in a japanned box with 100 others, and Mr. Vane laid it on the table in front of me and stepped back. Now, here is what I did before I looked at it, and I could not have told you at the time why. I put my hands in my lap. I sat all the way back in the chair, and I looked first at the shape of the whole paper from a foot away, the way you look at a face in a doorway before you look at the eyes, because I had handled 10,000 of those in 11 years, and I knew what one of mine looked like across a room. The body of it was written in a clerk's hand I did not know. The amount in the box was written large, the way the Saginaw men do it and the way I never have. And at the bottom, on the line, was my father's name in my writing. I do not mean it was like my writing. I mean that if you had put it in front of me in that room and told me I had written it on a Tuesday, I would have believed you, and I would have gone home and worried about my memory. The long J with the loop that comes back under, the way the U and the N run together in Junius, because I always wrote it faster than the rest. The little upstroke at the end of the Y that goes nowhere, which is not a flourish. It is a habit from a pen I had in '84 with a bad nib. Somebody had my hand. Somebody had sat down with a page of it and studied it the way you study a piece of music, and had got it, all but one thing, the capital O in Ordway. I make my O with the pen coming in from below and around, and it closes at the top, and the closing stroke crosses itself and goes on into the R, which makes a little peak like a hat at the top of the letter. Everybody who has ever taken an Ordway draft has seen that peak. Mr. Dorrance's own father used to call it the Ordway steeple. The O on that draft was closed at the top like a wedding ring, round and pretty and finished and wrong. I heard my own blood then. That is not a figure of speech. There was a sound in my ears like a hand held over each one, and the room went narrow and long, and I put both palms flat on the table, because the table was the only thing in the world I was sure of. My mouth filled up with a taste like a penny under the tongue. Mr. Vane said something, and I could not hear it. I remember thinking with perfect clearness that I must not be sick on the bank's floor, and that if I was going to be sick, I must ask for the yard. Mrs. Halloway, Mr. Dorrance had come round the table. He did not touch me. He put a glass of water down where my hand could find it, and then went and stood at the window with his back turned, and gave me 2 minutes. And I have been grateful to that dry little man ever since. When I could speak, I said, "How many more are there like this one?" "I do not know," he said to the window. "Then we shall have to find out," I said, "and I will want the box." He turned around. He took his spectacles off. "Mrs. Halloway, I am going to say a thing to you now that I cannot say twice, and you will understand why. If there is paper in this bank that carries a signature that is not what it purports to be, and if the mill cannot meet the December call, then in the ordinary course, this bank protects itself, and the person who wrote the name goes to the county jail at Kessel City. Not the person who profited, the person who wrote it." He put the spectacles back on. "In this county, that has been a woman exactly one time in my career, and it was not because she was guilty. Do you take my meaning?" I took his meaning. I went through that box for 2 hours and 40 minutes with Mr. Vane sitting across from me, writing down what I told him. There were 9 drafts drawn between the January of '92 and the December of '92, none of them in my books, all of them signed with my father's name in my hand, all of them with that round, finished O. $600, $450, $800, 2 of them for 1,000 even. Together, $4,930, gone out of a mill that had 11,400 coming due in December. And every single one of them was dated in a week when I was not in the county, or was home in bed, or was up at the Bracken place nursing Sylvie through the scarlet fever in the November of that year, which the whole town could swear to because Reverend Bracken had said a prayer for her from the pulpit. Whoever had done it had not merely learned my hand. He had waited each time until I was not there. He knew where I was. He knew it for a year. And to know a thing like that about a woman, week by week, month by month, for a year, you have to be in her house. I did not sleep that night, and I did not sleep much for a week. And I am going to tell you what those nights were, because the sleepless part is the part that gets left out of stories like this one, and it is where most of a woman's life actually happens. I would lie on my back with my hands folded on my chest, like a body laid out, and go through the year 1892, month by month, hunting the days. The 4th of March to the 19th, Grand Rapids. the last week of June, when I had the summer complaint. The whole of November, Sylvie and the scarlet fever, the sheet over the door and the vinegar in the pan. Each of those weeks had a draft in it, and each draft had my hand on it, and every one had gone through the Kessel County Bank while I was 40 miles away or in a sick room with a rag in my hand. Then, at about 2 in the morning, the thing would turn over the way it does, and instead of hunting the days, I would be hunting my own memory, and I would think, "Are you certain you were away?" And then I would be up out of the bed and down the stairs in the dark with my hand on the wall, into the kitchen, to look at my own household book, where I have written the day's weather and the day's errands every night since I was a bride, because that is the only diary a working woman has time to keep. The weather is what saved my reason. Rain on the 12th of March, 92 in Grand Rapids, and the note that we had put newspapers under the door of that rented room. You cannot invent that a year later. By the 4th night, I had made myself a list, and the list is the reason I am able to tell you this story in order. 9 dates, beside each one where I was and who could swear to it, and what paper existed to prove it. And beside that list, I wrote a second one, and it had 3 names on it: Merritt, Foy, and the third name I wrote down and then scratched out so hard that the pen went through the paper. And the third name was my father's, because that is where a thing like this takes you at 2 in the morning. If a man wanted money out of that mill for a year and did not want it in the books, there were only 3 people alive with the standing to arrange it. And one of them had spent his last winter shutting a door on me with Amos Kettering behind it, and telling me he had been an old fool about a thing. The light in the office window came on the 9th of August. I had gone out to the back steps for the coal at about 9:30, and Nell was right. It is only from the top of those steps that you can see the office window past the corner of the second drying shed. There was a lamp burning in my back room, not the front room, mine. I did not run down there. I went inside first and got the small lamp, and I put on my shoes, and I told Nell where I was going. And Nell said, "I will come." And I said, "You will stand at the top of the steps and you will watch. And if I am not back inside a quarter of an hour, you will go and knock on Reverend Bracken's door." 2 months earlier, I would not have thought of that. Something in me had already begun to move before I knew it had. The office door was unlocked. The lamp was on my table. My brother Foy was in my chair with the 92 book open in front of him and a pen in his hand. And he had a second book beside it, a slim one, half the size, bound in red, which I had never seen in my life. He looked up and he was not startled. That was the worst part of it. He smiled at me the way he had smiled at me across a supper table for 40 years. "Verna," he said, "you will want to sit down. You are at my table. I am at the mill's table, at my own mill, at an hour when nobody bothers me, doing a piece of work that has to be done by somebody." He set the pen down. "Sit down. You have been to Kessel City. Dorrance's boy told me you spent an afternoon in the back room with the box." "He told you," I said. "People tell me things. It is what I am for in this family." He leaned back and put his hands behind his head, and his little finger ring caught the lamp. "You have found 9 drafts. I will save you the arithmetic. There were 11, but 2 of them were made good in the spring of 92 out of the Saginaw settlement, so they are not on the bank's list." I stood in my own doorway with the small lamp in my hand, and I felt the floor go a long way off and then come back. 11, I said. "Sit down, Verna." I sat down, on the wooden chair by the door where the men sat when they came in about their pay, and I put the lamp on the floor beside me, and I said, "How much?" 6,000 and some. "How much?" 6,280, said my brother. "Give or take a little on the two that are settled." I did not say anything for a moment. Outside, an owl went off in the trees along the river, twice, and a saw carriage that was not running made a small clicking noise the way iron does when it is cooling in the night, and I remember both of those sounds better than I remember his face. "You wrote our father's name," I said. "I did. In my hand." "In your hand," he agreed pleasantly, "because there was no other hand it could be in. Father had not signed a paper since '82. Every man from here to Chicago has been taking Ordway paper with your writing on it for 11 years. If it had come to them in mine, it would have been questioned in an hour, and the whole thing would have gone up like a shed." He said it as if he were explaining a small mechanical difficulty. "You have to be fair, Verna. It was the only way it could be done at all." "Fair," I said. "You would not have signed them." I did ask myself, "And you would not have, because you would have wanted them in the book, and they could not go in the book." I asked him why. I said it quietly. I have been told since that quiet was a mistake, that I should have gone at him and screamed the house down, but I have never in my life been able to make a noise at the moment when a noise is called for. It all goes to my hands. My hands were shaking so that I had to press them between my knees to keep them still, and my brother sat in my chair and watched me do it. "Because I owe money in Detroit," he said. "Because I have owed money in Detroit since '89. Because the man I owe it to is not a bank and does not renew. And because in this world, a debt like that has to be paid on the day it is called. And Father, who buried a wife and raised 3 children and built that yard out of nothing, would not have given me $1 to save my neck." He said the last part without any heat at all. He told me so, in this room, in the March of '90. He said, and I remember it exactly, that a man who cannot govern himself has no business with money, and that I would get my half when he was dead and not 1 hour before. "So you took it out of the mill?" "I took an advance," said Foy, "against a half that was going to be mine in any case. And here we are, and it is mine, and there is nothing to argue about." "There is $6,280 to argue about," I said, "and a bank meeting in December, and a mortgage that must be renewed, and books that will be put in front of men who add." And that is when my brother stopped being pleasant, and I saw, for the first time in my life, what was actually inside him. He leaned forward into the lamp with his forearms on my table. "Now you listen to me," he said. "Those 9 papers have your writing on them, not mine, yours. There is a specimen of your hand on file with Amos Kettering, sworn and witnessed, from '82. And there is another in Dorrance's own vault, because he made you write one out in '85 when he took the first mortgage. Any man in this state who lays those side by side will tell you the same thing, and I will tell you what he will not say. He will not say Foy Ordway. He will have no reason on this earth to say Foy Ordway, because I have never been near a pen in that bank in my life." I said, "Father was alive on every one of those dates. He would have known his own name." "Father is dead," said my brother, "and dead men are wonderful for this sort of thing." There it was. And here is the piece of it I did not expect, the piece that stayed with me longest. He did not gloat. He looked tired and a little disgusted, the way a man looks who has been carrying something heavy for a long way and has just been asked why he does not put it down. "Verna," he said, "I am not your enemy. Sit still and I will show you how this ends, and you will see that I am not." He reached into the breast of his coat and brought out a folded paper and smoothed it on the table, and turned it around to face me and pushed the lamp closer to it so I could read. And it was typewritten, which in that year meant a lawyer in a city, and it was already dated for the following week. I have that paper yet. It says that in consideration of the sum of $1 and of natural love and affection, Verna Halloway, widow of Ludworth, releases and forever discharges Merritt Ordway and Foy Ordway from all claims, demands, and accountings whatsoever arising out of the estate of Junius Ordway, deceased, and out of the business heretofore conducted as Ordway and Sons, and acknowledges that she has had no interest in the said business at any time. "Sign that," he said, "and I will put every one of those drafts in the fire before the 1st of September, and there will be no 11, and there will be no 9, and there will be nothing whatever with your name on it anywhere in the world. Dorrance holds the paper on the mill, not on you. He is a banker. He wants his 11,400, and he wants a mill that runs. And if the mill runs, he will take his money and ask nobody any questions." "And if I do not sign it?" "Then in December there is a meeting," Foy said, "and the books go on the table, and 9 drafts come out of a japanned box in front of 6 men who hold the paper, and I will sit there and be as astonished as anybody in the room." He let that stand for a moment. "You are a widow with a daughter to settle, living in a house that is yours for your lifetime by our sufferance, on $20 a month that comes out of our pockets. Think about what happens to Sylvie." "You would put me in the county jail," I said, "to save yourself." "I would not put you anywhere," said my brother. "I would sit still, which is a different thing, and I am very good at it." He stood up and put his hat on and turned my chair back into the table, exactly the way Merritt had done in April. And I have never been able to decide whether that was a family habit or whether one of them had learned it from the other. Take a week. Talk to nobody. Certainly not to Merritt, who has no head for this and would only make himself sick. He went to the door and stopped beside me with his hand on the frame. "You have kept this family's books for 20 years, Verna," he said, and his voice had gone gentle again. "And in all that time, nobody ever gave you so much as a share of the letterhead. Does that not tell you what they are worth to you, these people? Sign the paper. Keep your house. Let it go." Then he went out, and I sat on that wooden chair in the dark because the lamp on the floor had guttered out while he was talking, and I had never noticed. And at the top of the back steps, a quarter of a mile off, my Nell Quill stood watching the office window with her arms wrapped round herself, waiting to see whether she was going to have to go and knock on the minister's door. I did not sign it in a week, and I did not sign it in 2, and my brother, to give him his due, did not come and ask. He let the paper sit on the corner of my table, and every morning I came in at 6, and it was the first thing my eye went to. And that is a form of pressure that costs a man nothing to apply. The first thing I did was go for Amos Kettering. And the first thing I learned is that in 1893, a woman cannot simply go for a lawyer. I walked to Aldenbrook and took the stage and was at his office in Kessel City by 11. And there was a card in the window of the door, and the card said that Mr. Kettering had been called to his son's house in Cleveland on account of illness and would return in October. I stood on that sidewalk with the card in front of my face for a good while. October. It is nothing now. In that year, in that town, October meant October. I wrote him a letter that night, 4 pages, and I want you to know what it cost me, because I had to set down in ink, to a man who had known me since I was a girl, the sentence, "There are drafts in the Kessel County Bank bearing my father's name in my writing, which I did not write." Then I posted it, and it went to Cleveland, and I waited. And while I waited, September happened. I went to Merritt on the 2nd Sunday in September, after church, because it was the one afternoon in the week when he was neither at the mill nor in his own parlor with people about. He was in his garden behind the house on Pratt Street, in his shirt sleeves, tying up the last of the tomatoes with strips of rag, and Ottilie was in the kitchen window where she could see us and not hear us, which I did not think about at the time and have thought about a great deal since. "Merritt," I said, "I have to talk to you about Foy." He went on tying. "I know what you have to talk to me about." That stopped me. "You know." "He told me you had been to Kessel City." He pulled a strip of rag tight and knotted it. "He told me there is old paper of father's in the bank that never went through your books, from '92, when things were tight. He said you had got it into your head that there was something crooked in it, and that you had gone at him about it in the middle of the night. There it is. I want the women listening to hear how that is done, because it is done to us all our lives, and it is done so beautifully that we sometimes help." He had not lied. Every part of what Foy told my brother was true. It was only that the truth had been laid down in a particular order, and the order made me a woman with an idea in her head. "There are 9 drafts," I said. $6,280. He told me so himself, in my office, with his hat on. He owes it in Detroit and has owed it since '89. Merritt straightened up. He was a big man, and he did it slowly, and he looked at the tomatoes and not at me. 6,000, he said, 280. That is more than he told me. Merritt. I waited until he had to look. He wrote father's name, in my hand, on purpose, on days when I was out of the county. He waited each time until I was gone. He has a book of it, a red book, half the size of the ledgers, and it is not in the safe, so it is at his lodging, or it is in Detroit. My brother stood in the sun with a strip of rag in his hand, and I watched him understand it, and I watched him decide, and both of those things happened inside of about 4 seconds, and I could not tell you to this day which one came first. "What do you want me to do?" he said. "I want you to stand up in December and say what the drafts are. I want the mill's own books to be the mill's own books. I want Dorrance to hear it from you, before the meeting, because if he hears it from me first, with my hand on the paper, then it is a woman making an accusation against 2 men, and you know what that is worth. And what becomes of Foy?" "That is not my arithmetic," I said. "He did it. He is my brother." "So am I," I said, "or near enough, and I have 30 years in that office to say so." And Merritt Ordway looked at me with an expression I had never seen on him, and I understood that I had said the wrong thing, and that there was no right thing, and that I had lost before I opened the gate. "You are my sister," he said, "and you are a widow with a daughter, and you have a home and a keep for as long as you live, and nobody is putting you out of it. But if I stand up in December and say what you want me to say, then in January there is a man of this family in the county jail, and the name that is on that mill and on 11 flat cars and on my son's shop front in Bay City is a name that people say in a certain way for the next 40 years. He wound the rag around his hand. "You are asking me to hang my brother to keep a set of books straight. I am asking you to keep $6,000 from being hung on me. Nobody is hanging anything on you. You have not been accused of anything by anybody." "Not yet," I said. "Verna." He said my name the way you put a hand up to stop a wagon. "Do you know what I have done every day since the 10th of April? I have kept 90 men in work in the worst year since the war. That is what I have got in my 2 hands, and it is all I have got, and I am not going to smash it in December for a matter of bookkeeping between a dead man and his own son." A matter of bookkeeping. My brother said that to me in his garden with his tomatoes. I did not answer him. I turned and went out through the gate, and as I came round the front of the house, Ottilie came out onto the porch, drying her hands, and she did a thing that I have thought about more than anything else that happened that year. She came down the steps, and she took both of my hands in her wet ones, and she held them hard, and she looked back at the house once, and she said, quietly and quickly, "Your father changed his paper. In the fall, the year before last, Amos Kettering came out to the house at night with his clerk to witness it, and Nell gave them coffee. She squeezed my hands until it hurt. I have not said that to you." And then she let go and said, in an entirely different voice, loud enough to carry to the garden, "You will take a jar of the beans with you, Verna. I have more than we can eat," and went back into the house. I walked home up Bell Street in the September heat with a jar of beans in my hands, and what was in me was not triumph. It was the beginning of something worse. Because if my father had changed his will in the fall of '91, then the will Amos Kettering read out in that parlor in April, the one with the household linens in it, was the old one. And the man who fetched Amos Kettering to that house in April, and who had sat with our father the whole of the last night, and who had been standing at the window with his back to the bed when I came up the stairs with the pitcher, was Merritt. Now I have to tell you about the last week of September, because that is when the ground came up under me for a little while, and I let myself believe that all of it might yet come right. On the 20th, a letter came from Mr. Dorrance. It was 2 lines. He wrote that a buyer in Toledo would take 400,000 feet of white pine at a price he named, that he had taken it upon himself to hold the offer open for the Ordway yard for 10 days, and that he thought I would want to see the figure before my brothers did. I put the figure against the mortgage. It did not cover it. It covered rather more than half of it, and it turned a mill that was dead on the siding into a mill with something moving. And in that year, in that county, that was the difference between a business and a pile of lumber. I took it to Merritt myself, because whatever had happened in his garden, the work was still the work. He read it twice, and his whole face came apart in a way I had not seen since our mother's funeral, and he said, "Verna, this is the thing. This is the thing itself." And he went straight down to the yard in his Sunday clothes and had them start pulling the 400,000 feet out of the stacks that same afternoon. For 5 days we were something like a family again. Merritt in the yard, me in the back office with 3 tally boards going at once, Foy arranging cars, and every one of us in that peculiar good temper that comes over people when there is finally something to do. On the 24th of September, I worked until 9 at night and walked up the hill in the dark and slept without waking, for the first time since July. On the 26th, I went into Kessel City to sign the tally sheets at the bank, and there was a paper on Mr. Vane's counter, folded to the 2nd page, and I read it while I waited, the way you read anything that is in front of you. It was 3 lines in the Kessel City Weekly, in the notices, between a sale of harness and a meeting of the Odd Fellows. Mr. Ransom Dorrance of this city announces the engagement of his daughter Clemmy to Mr. Foy Ordway of Ludworth. The marriage will take place at the Dorrance residence on the 10th of November. I read it twice. Then I looked up, and Tobias Vane was standing on the other side of his own counter, watching me read it, with his pen in his hand and the ink drying on the nib. And the look on that young man's face told me that everybody in that bank had known for a week, and that not one of them had been able to think of a way to tell me. The 10th of November. The mortgage fell due the first Monday in December. Between those two dates, my brother Foy would be the son-in-law of the man who held the paper, and every draft in that japanned box would be family business, to be settled quietly among family, and the only person in the whole arrangement who was not going to be family was the woman whose handwriting was on all of it. Amos Kettering came home from Cleveland on the 4th of October, and on the 5th I was on his step at 8 in the morning, and he opened the door himself with his collar not yet on, took one look at my face, and said, "Come in, Verna, and sit down before you say anything." He was 66, and he had drawn the papers for every farm and store and mill in that county for 40 years, and I had known him all my life as a dry old party who smelled of cigars and let me have the sugar lumps out of the bowl when I was 5. He read my 4 pages standing up in his own hallway. Then he read them again sitting down. "You did not write those drafts," he said. "It was not a question, and I have never in my life been so grateful for a man not asking a question." I did not. "No." He put the letter down on his knee. "In '82, your father sat in my office and dictated an authority and had you sign it and had Pettibone and me witness it. I have that authority in the register in the other room, and beside it the specimen of your hand, and beside that the specimen you gave the bank in '85, which Dorrance copied to me for the file. 3 specimens, Verna, over 11 years. He took off his spectacles and rubbed the 2 red marks on the sides of his nose. There is no man in this state who could look at those 3 and at a forgery and not know one from the other in 5 minutes. Whoever did this was clever enough to steal a hand and not clever enough to understand that hands are on file." "He does not need it to hold up forever," I said. "He needs it to hold up for one afternoon in December in a room full of men who want their money." "That," said Mr. Kettering, "is the first sensible thing anybody has said to me since I came back from Ohio." Then I told him what Ottilie had said on her porch steps, and the old man went very still. "Your father executed a codicil to his will on the 28th of October, 1891, he said, "in the front room of your house at 9 in the evening, witnessed by myself and my clerk, Mr. Sedgwick, who has since gone to Grand Rapids and whom I can produce on 2 days' notice. Your housekeeper brought in coffee. Junius signed it with his own left hand, badly and slowly, and I made him initial each page, and I remember he swore at me twice about it." The room went a little strange around me. "You read the old will in April?" "I read the will and the codicil in April," said Amos Kettering. "Verna," he leaned forward, "say what you are saying." "There was no codicil read in that parlor," I said. "I was in the kitchen with the door open. Foy came in afterward and told me the terms, and the terms were the old ones. The mill in halves, money for Sylvie at her marriage, the house to me for my life, $20 a month, the linens, and the plate. Nobody said the word codicil in that house, not that day and not since. And if they had said it in that parlor, I should have heard it through the wall, because I heard everything else." The old man got up. He went and stood at his window with his hands behind his back, and stayed there long enough that I began to count the ticks of the clock on his mantel. "I read from my own copy," he said at last, "which is a copy, because the original of that codicil went into your father's hands that night, and he would not give it back to me. He said he had a place for it. I told him at the time that a man who keeps his own papers is a man who wants a quarrel after he is dead. He turned around. In April, after the reading, in the hall, your brother Merritt asked me whether a codicil that could not be found could still be given effect. I told him it could if its execution were proved and its terms proved, but that it would be a long and expensive business, and the county judge would want to know first why it could not be found. He said that he had been through the desk himself and that he believed his father had destroyed it in the last week, being of a mind to leave things as they had always stood. And you accepted that? I did not accept it, said Amos Kettering, and I did not challenge it, and there is a difference, and it is the difference I shall have to think about for whatever time I have left. I am an old man, and my son is sick, and I went to Cleveland on the 11th of April. He came and stood over me. Now, you have not asked me the terms. Tell me the terms. Your father revoked the disposition of the business, he said. Under the codicil, the mill office, the books, the accounts, and the management of the concern go to you outright, together with 1/2 of the shares of the business itself. Merritt takes the mill works and 1/4. Foy takes 1/4, but Foy's quarter is charged with every dollar he has taken out of the concern since the 1st of January, 1889, to be ascertained from the books, and if the charge exhausts the quarter, then he takes nothing and owes the difference to the estate. The clock on his mantel ticked 11 times before I could get my breath in. Since '89, I said. That is the date in the paper. It is not a date a lawyer picks out of the air, Verna. Your father named it because he knew it. There is a particular kind of blow, and I hope you have not had one. It does not come from your enemy. It comes from behind, out of the past, from somebody who is dead and cannot be gone at. And it takes away not your money and not your house, but the ground you have stood on your whole life. My father knew. In 1889, when I had already given that mill 7 years of my life, my father knew that his son was stealing from him. He knew it in '91, when he sat down at night with Amos Kettering and a clerk and put it in writing. He knew it in the January of '92, when the first of those 9 drafts went through the Kessel County Bank with my hand on it and my name at risk on it, and he said nothing to me. He knew it in the November of '92, when I was sitting up with a scarlet fever child and a paper went across a counter 40 miles away that could have put me in the county jail, and he said nothing to me. And in the January of the year he died, he shut a door on me and told me he had been an old fool about a thing, and that he was seeing to it, and that when it was seen to, I would be angry with him for a week. A week. He thought a week. I did not cry in Amos Kettering's front room. I sat there and I said, "Then it is in that house somewhere." And my voice came out of me flat and businesslike, and the old man looked at me with something like alarm. "There is a thing I want to say to you," he said. "You may find that paper, and it may still come to nothing, because to prove a codicil, you must go into court, and a court in December in a county where the Ordways employ 90 men and the bank is about to marry into them, is not a friendly room for a widow with a grievance. Do you understand me?" "I understand you." "Then I will say the other thing. If you find it, do not carry it about with you, and do not put it in your house, and do not put it in that safe. Bring it to me, and I will put it where it will be found by a judge and not by a brother." I went home on the 2 o'clock stage, and on the way I did the only thing I could do, which was to think it through like a set of accounts, and this is what I came to. The paper had gone into my father's hands in the front room on the 28th of October, 91. He had a place for it, he said. He did not use the office safe because the office safe was mine as much as his, and he was hiding it from a son who was in and out of that office every week. In the house, there were exactly two things a man of that generation kept papers in. There was the tin box under the bed with the insurance and the burial money, which I had gone through myself the day after the funeral with Nell beside me. And there was his secretary desk, the walnut one with the fall front, that had been my grandfather's and had stood in the front room by the north window as long as I had been alive. And on the Saturday after the funeral, Merritt had come with the dray and two men and taken that desk out of my house because, he said, Ottilie had always been promised it. I asked Nell that night. I asked her in the kitchen with the door shut and the lamp between us, and I asked her carefully, because she is a woman who has spent her life not seeing things, and I did not want to frighten her. The night Mr. Kettering came out with the young man, I said, October of 91, you carried in the coffee. I did. Did you see what my father did with the paper afterward? Nell Quill put her hands in her apron and looked at the table for a while. He waited until they were down the walk, she said. Then he stood up and went to the secretary and let down the front. There is a little door in the middle of it, between the pigeonholes, with a brass ring. I know the little door. Behind that door there is a space, and the back of the space slides. She said it steadily, looking at the table. He put the paper in there, and he slid it shut, and he stood a minute with his hand on it, and then he shut the front and locked it, and put the key in his waistcoat. And he saw me in the doorway, and he said, Nell? And I said, Yes, Mr. Ordway. And he said, You have not seen me tonight. And I said, No, sir. And that is the last word either of us ever spoke about it. I sat back in my chair. Why did you not tell me in April? I said, and I said it gently, but she flinched all the same. Because in April you would have gone straight to your brother Merritt and asked him to open the desk, said Nell. And I did not know then what I know now. And what do you know now? That the desk went out of this house 4 days after your father died, she said. And that Mrs. Ottilie has never in 26 years mentioned wanting it. Ottilie sent word on the 11th of October. It came the way things come between women who are being careful, which is to say, it came as an ordinary thing. A boy brought a note that said Mr. Ordway would be at the Bay City Yard on Thursday and Friday, and that she would be glad of company on Thursday afternoon, and that she had put by more damson preserve than 2 people could use. I walked to Pratt Street on Thursday at 2 o'clock with a basket over my arm like a woman going to see her brother's wife. She had the door open before I was up the steps. She did not say one word to me in that hall. She took my basket and set it on the floor and walked ahead of me into the back parlor, which is Merritt's room, where he does the mill's business at home, and where there is a roll-top desk against one wall and my grandfather's walnut secretary standing against the other with a bowl of pears on it. Ottilie went and stood at the front window with her back to me, looking out at the street, exactly as Mr. Dorrance had stood at his window in the bank, and she said, The little key is in the blue jar on the mantel. He does not know I have ever noticed it. My hands were shaking so that it took me 3 tries to get the key into the lock. The fall front came down. The smell that came out of that desk was my father. Tobacco and ink and the peppermints he kept for his cough. And it went through me so that I had to stop and hold on to the edge of it with both hands. The little door in the middle had the brass ring. Behind it was a shallow space with 2 receipts and a broken watch chain in it. I put my fingers to the back of the space and pressed, and it did not move. And I pressed at the top, and it did not move. And then I put my thumbs at the bottom corners and pushed up, and the panel slid a half-inch and stuck, and I worked it with my nails until it came. There was a long envelope in there, and it was not sealed, and on the front of it, in my father's own terrible left-handed printing, big and crooked as a child's, it said, "For Verna, to be opened by her." And it had been opened. I did not open that envelope in my brother's house. I think the truth is that I was afraid of what my own face would do, and Audley was standing 8 feet away at the window with her back to me, and I could not have borne for her to hear me make a sound. I put it inside my shirtwaist, against my skin, the same place I had carried Mr. Vane's 4 sheets in July, and I slid the panel back and shut the little door with the brass ring, and closed the fall front, and put the key in the blue jar the way it had been lying. Then I picked up my basket, and Audley turned round from the window, and we looked at each other, and neither of us said one word, because there was nothing that could be said in that room that would not have to be repeated in a courtroom afterward. She had been married to my brother 26 years. She stood at a window and let me into his desk, and then she gave me a jar of damson preserve at the door and told me to mind the second step because the frost had lifted it. I walked out to the end of Pratt Street and turned down toward the river and went along the bank until I came to the flat rock below the second bend, where I used to be taken to fish when I was 6 years old, and I sat down there on the cold stone with the water going by, and I took out the envelope. There were 2 papers in it. The first was 4 pages, and it was the codicil, and it was exactly as Amos Kettering had told me, word for word, initialed at the foot of every page in that dreadful, crooked left hand, and signed at the end, and witnessed by Amos Kettering, attorney, and Orrin Sedgwick, clerk, both of Kessel City, on the 28th day of October, 1891. The second was 1 page, folded twice, in the same left hand, and it took me a long time to read it because he wrote about 11 words to a line, and the lines wandered downhill. My daughter, if you are reading this, I am dead, and Kettering has done as he was told, or you have gone hunting, and either way, you have got here at last. I have known about your brother since the spring of '89, when Dorrance showed me a paper I had never seen, and I told him to his face it was mine, because I would not have it said in that bank that an Ordway had passed a bad name. I paid it, and I said nothing. I have paid 4 of them. I told myself he would come right. Then I told myself the shame would kill your mother's memory in this town. Then I told myself I would see to it in the spring, and then in the fall, and a man can go on telling himself that until he is old. I did not tell you because you would have gone to him, and he would have said it was you, and I have known since '82 that the day would come when my son would stand up and say that the hand on the paper was his sister's. I have set that straight in the paper with this one. Kettering has the whole of it in his register, and Sedgwick will swear to it, and Pettibone will swear my right hand has been dead 11 years. Verna, I left the office to you because it has been yours since '82, and everybody in this county knows it, and I was too proud to say it while I could still be argued with. I have made a poor job of being your father in this. You will not forgive me by the funeral, and I do not ask it. Take the books to Dorrance and let him add. That is the whole of the letter, and I have it in this house tonight. I sat on that rock until the light went off the water. I would like to tell you I wept. What I did was worse and quieter. I sat and let go, one at a time, of things I had believed for 11 years. My father did not overlook me. He knew what I was worth and wrote it down, and then he put the paper in a hole in a desk and left me to find it, because he could not bear to say it out loud in a room with me in it. My brother Foy is not weak. He is a man who spent a year waiting for the weeks when I was nursing a sick child. And my brother Merritt, who has never in his life raised his voice at me, opened an envelope that said, "For Verna," to be opened by her, and read it, and put it back, and stood at the graveside next to me with his hat in his hands. When it was full dark, I got up off that rock, and I want to tell you exactly what was in my mind, because this is the place where I stopped being the woman this was happening to. I thought, 11 books, 11 years, one for each, 9 drafts, and every one of them has a date on it, and every date has a place where I was, and every place has a person who can swear it. 3 specimens of my hand in 3 registers, 1 authority under seal from 1882, 1 doctor who will say what that stroke took, 1 housekeeper who saw a paper go into a desk, 1 codicil, 4 pages, initialed at the foot of each, and 1 banker who took his spectacles off in his own back room and told a woman what would happen to her when he did not have to tell her anything at all. I did not have a grievance. I had an account, and I have never in my life been beaten at an account. I took the papers to Amos Kettering on the Friday. He put them in his safe in a sealed cover with a receipt to me, and a second sealed cover went to the Register of Probate in Kessel City on the Monday morning, so that from that day there were 2 men in that county besides myself who could say where the codicil of Junius Ordway was, and my brothers were neither of them one. Then I went to my brother Merritt on the Saturday in the mill office at 4 o'clock, and I did the only thing in this whole story that I did out of feeling rather than out of arithmetic, and I have never once been sorry. He was at the front room table with the tally boards. "I have been to your house," I said. "I have opened Father's desk. I have got the codicil, and I have got his letter, and both of them are in Kettering's safe, and a copy is lodged with the probate register. And I am telling you that to your face, so that you cannot ever say afterward that you were not told. I have seen men take bad news at a mill for 30 years. There is a thing that happens in the shoulders." Merritt sat there, and it went through him and came out the other side. And then he put both hands flat on the tally boards and looked at them. "You opened it," I said. "It said, 'For Verna,' to be opened by her, in his own hand, and you opened it." "I opened it in April," he said, "the day after we buried him, before I ever moved the desk out of that house. I had gone in to look for the burial receipt." "And you read it?" "I read it." "And then you carried that desk out of my house on a dray, and you have sat in that room with it against the wall for 6 months, and you have come into this office twice a day, every day, with your hat in your hand, and given me the numbers." "Yes," said my brother. I waited. I had promised myself on the walk down that I would wait, that I would not fill his silence for him the way women are trained from the cradle to fill silences. And it was the hardest half-minute of that entire year. "If that paper goes to the judge," he said at last, "then the books are opened. And if the books are opened, then Foy is in the dock at the spring assize, and the mill is in the newspapers from here to Detroit, in the middle of the worst year any of us have seen, and the men are turned off, and the bank calls the mortgage the same week, because a bank will not carry a scandal. That is not a guess, Verna. That is what happens." He looked up at me for the first time. "You would have the whole of it, and what you would have is a burnt yard and 100 men out of work, and a name that is a joke." "That is what you told yourself," I said, "for 6 months. That is what I have known for 6 months." "And the $20 a month, Merritt, did you tell yourself about that too? Every month since April, you have paid me $20 out of a business that was 1/2 mine by our father's hand, and you have watched me be grateful for it." And Merritt Ordway, who ran 90 men and never shouted at one of them, put his face in his hands at that table. "I did not know how to stop," he said. "Every month it got harder to say." I let him sit there. Then I said the thing I had come to say. "Here is what will happen. On the 4th of December, there is a meeting in Ransom Dorrance's office with the men who hold that mortgage. I shall be at it, and I shall bring the 11 books and the codicil and Amos Kettering, and everything that is in those books will be said out loud in front of the men who hold your paper. You cannot stop that now. There is only one thing left in this world that you have the deciding of, and it is whether, when it is said, you are the man who stood up and said it, or the man who sat still while his sister did." I picked up my hat. "Foy has taken $6,280 and put my name on it. You have taken nothing at all, and you have done him one better, because he only stole money." That was on the 21st of October. My brother Foy was married to Clemmy Dorrance on the 10th of November at her father's house in Kessel City, and there were 80 people at it, and I did not go, and neither did Merritt, and the Kessel City Weekly said it was one of the pleasantest occasions of the season. I want to tell you about the 24th of November, which was the day I told my daughter. I had put it off. I had told myself she was young and that a girl of 22 should not have to carry it. And the truth was that I was afraid of her face. She had 2 uncles who had taken her to the fair and taught her to fish off that same flat rock and put money in her hand at Christmas since she could walk. I told her in the kitchen with the door shut. It took the better part of an hour because she made me go back over it twice, being her father's daughter and quick. And when I had finished, she sat with her hands in her lap and did not cry either. "The money grandfather left me," she said, "for when I marry." "Yes." "It comes out of the business." "It does." "Then if you do this and the business goes into court, there may be no money." "There may be none," I said. "And there may be no house either in the end, because the house is mine for my life. Under the old will and under the new one, I could be made to fight for it. And I am 47 years old, and I have $20 a month and my mother's china." Sylvie sat and looked at the table for a while, the way Nell had done, and I have never been so frightened of a silence in my life. "When I was 14, she said, I asked you why your name was not on the office door with the others, and you told me that the door was only paint. I remember." "Do it," said my daughter, "and I will get my own money the way you got yours, which is by working for it. And if there is nothing left at the end of it, then there is nothing left. But I will not have my mother go into that bank in December and be looked at as a woman who was given $20 a month and was glad of it." The night before the 4th of December, I did not go to bed at all. I laid the 11 books out on the kitchen table in a row, oldest to newest, with the tally sheets from the Toledo sale beside them, and Mr. Vane's 4 sheets, and the list of my 9 dates with the witnesses written against each one in my own hand, and Amos Kettering's copy of the codicil, because the original was in the probate register's iron box, and would come into that room on Monday under the old man's arm. Nell came down at 1 o'clock in her wrapper and made coffee without being asked, and set it at my elbow and went away again. At about 3, I stopped working and sat back, and the house was so quiet I could hear the ash settling in the stove. and I looked down that row of books, 11 of them, black cloth with red corners, and I thought about the woman who had written them. She got up at 4:30 for 11 years. She cut a man's meat for him at his own table for 11 years, so he would not have to ask. She wrote another person's name 10,000 times and never once wrote her own on anything that mattered. And when they read out the will, she was in the kitchen with a knife in her hand, listening through a wall. At about 4 o'clock, I got up and washed my face and did my hair and put on my black wool, which was the best I had. And I took my mother's china cup down off the shelf and drank my coffee out of it standing at the window while it got light over the drying sheds. And I found that my hands were perfectly steady and that I was not afraid of any man who was going to be in that room, and that what I felt, God forgive me, was something very close to appetite. The 4th of December came in gray and still, with an inch of dry snow on Bell Street that squeaked under the wheels. Merritt sent his own rig up for me at 7, which he had never done in his life, and he sat up front with the boy and did not say 6 words the whole 9 miles to Aldenbrook, and we took the train in from there. I had the 11 books in 2 flour sacks with a strap around each, and I would not let anybody carry them. The Kessel County Bank had a room upstairs over the counting floor with a long table in it and a coal fire, and there were 6 men at that table besides Mr. Dorrance, who held pieces of the Ordway paper. One was a lumber factor from Saginaw named Rufe Mowbray. One was a quiet gentleman from Bay City who never once opened his mouth and who, I found out afterward, held more of that paper than all the rest of them together. Merritt and Foy sat on one side, and Amos Kettering and I sat on the other, and I put the 2 flour sacks on the floor beside my chair. Foy was in a new coat, and marriage suited him the way weather suits a house that has just been painted. He came round the table before we started and took my hand in both of his in front of every man in that room and said, "I am glad you came, Verna." And I let him do it, because there is no better place for a man to be than out on a limb he has climbed onto himself. Mr. Dorrance began the way bankers begin, with the year and the state of the lumber trade, and the fact that of $11,400 secured on the Ordway mill and the North timber falling due that day, the proceeds of the Toledo sale had reduced the principal to $6,150. He said the bank was prepared to consider a renewal for 1 year, subject to the meeting being satisfied as to the accounts of the concern. "As to the accounts," said Foy easily, "my brother and I have them in hand. There was a period last year when my late father's health made the books irregular, and we have been putting that right." "Irregular," said the Saginaw man. "Any concern that has been through this year has irregularities, Mr. Mowbray." "That is true enough," said Mowbray, and there was a general small movement of agreement round that table, and I saw exactly how it was going to go, and how easy it would have been, and how many hundreds of times it has gone that way in rooms like that one. Mr. Dorrance took his spectacles off. "Mrs. Halloway has kept the books of that concern since 1882, he said. "She is here at my invitation. I should like to hear from her before anything is decided." Foy laughed. It was a good laugh, warm, the kind that invites a room in. "My sister has had a hard year, gentlemen. She lost our father in April, and she has taken it into her head that there is something wrong at the mill, and I would rather she said her piece here among friends than went on carrying it about with her. So let her say it." "Thank you," I said. "I will." And I lifted the first sack onto the table. I did not make a speech. I have heard this story told back to me since, with a speech in it, and there was none. I opened the 82 book and turned it round to face them and put my finger on the first page. This is the account of Ordway and Sons from the 1st of July, 1882, I said, which is the week after my father's stroke, in my hand, checked and totaled monthly. There are 11 of them. Every draft drawn on that concern in 11 years is in these books, on the date it was drawn, with the amount and the purpose, and every one of them is signed with my father's name, because my father's right hand was dead, and he gave me his authority to write it, in this town, before Mr. Kettering and Dr. Pettibone, and the authority is in the register at Kettering's office, and a copy is on file in this bank. Then I set Mr. Vane's 4 sheets down in the middle of the table. That is the bank's own schedule of Ordway paper, prepared in July by Mr. Vane at that desk downstairs. 9 drafts on that schedule are not in these books. They were drawn between the January and the December of 1892. They come to $4,930 as the bank holds them, and to $6,280 with 2 that were settled before the schedule was made. The room had gone very quiet. Foy sat back in his chair with one arm over the back of it. "And with the 2 that were settled," said the quiet gentleman from Bay City, speaking for the first and nearly the last time, "you would exceed the whole of the reduction we have just been congratulating ourselves upon." "You would," I said. "Verna," said Foy kindly, "those are father's. He was an old man, and he was ill, and he did not always tell you." "Then we shall look at them," I said. "Mr. Dorrance, may we have the box?" Tobias Vane brought up the japanned box and set it in front of me, and I took out the 12th of March draft, $600, and laid it beside the 89 book, which was open at a page in my hand, and I turned them both around so they faced the table. "Gentlemen," I said, "I would like you to look at one letter, not the whole signature, the capital O in Ordway." 6 men leaned in. I have kept the picture of it. I make that letter with the stroke coming in from below and closing at the top and crossing itself into the R, which puts a little peak on it. Mr. Dorrance's father used to call it the Ordway steeple, and it is in every book on this table, 10,000 times, for 11 years. It is on the mortgage instrument this meeting is called about, which is in the vault of this bank. I put my finger on the draft. That O is closed round and smooth like a ring. There is no peak on it. There is not one letter like it in 11 years of my writing, and there are 9 of these. Rufe Mowbray took the draft up and held it to the window light, and then he took the ledger up beside it and did the same. And then he put both of them down and looked, not at me and not at Foy, but at Merritt. "There is a further matter," said Amos Kettering, and he got out the first of his papers. "I will not take you through all of it because it took 2 hours and 40 minutes and most of it was dates. But I will give you the shape because the shape is the thing." The 9 dates went onto the table one at a time, and against each date the place I had been, and against each place the person who would swear to it. My sister-in-law's landlady in Grand Rapids, Reverend Bracken, who had prayed for a scarlet fever child from his pulpit on the 6th of November, 92, and had the date in his parish book. 2 letters from my father, dictated to Nell Quill and signed with an X. The authority of 1882, under seal, with the specimen of my hand and the specimen of 85 out of the bank's own vault. And Dr. Pettibone, who was downstairs in the lobby that morning at his own expense, ready to swear on oath what an apoplexy in the spring of 82 had done to Junius Ordway's right hand. And when that was all on the table, Amos Kettering took out the codicil of the 28th of October, 1891, and read it aloud, all 4 pages, in that flat lawyer's voice, and Orrin Sedgwick, who had come down from Grand Rapids on the Saturday and slept at the hotel at my expense, stood up at the end of the table and said that he had witnessed it, and that the initials at the foot of each page were the ones he had watched Junius Ordway make. Foy said, "That paper was destroyed." "It was in my father's secretary desk," I said, "in the sliding compartment behind the little door, in an envelope addressed to me in his own hand. It has been in the probate register's box in this town since the 23rd of October, and the whole of this county may look at it." "Then how," said my brother, "did it get from a desk in my brother's back parlor to the probate register?" And there it was. He had done it to himself, in front of 6 men, out of temper, in 1 sentence. The room understood it about a half-second before he did. I watched it reach him. I watched him hear his own words come back at him and understand that he had just told a table full of creditors that he knew where that desk stood and whose parlor it stood in, and that a paper he had sworn was burned had been in it, and the color went out of his face from the top down like a lamp being turned off. Mr. Dorrance put his spectacles on. "Mr. Ordway," he said to Merritt, "did you have that codicil in your possession?" Now, I have been asked many times since whether I knew what my brother was going to say, and the honest answer is no. I had told him in October that the only thing left in the world that he had the deciding of was whether he was the man who stood up or the man who sat still, and I had said it to hurt him. Merritt Ordway got up out of his chair. He was 52 years old, and he stood there in a room full of men he had done business with for 30 years, and he took his hat off the table and held it in front of him like a man at a graveside. "I opened that envelope on the 12th of April, he said, "the day after we buried my father. It was addressed to my sister. I read the codicil, and I read his letter to her, and I put both back, and I had the desk carried out of her house on the Saturday, and I have kept it in my parlor since. I have paid my sister $20 a month out of a business that was 1/2 hers under my father's hand, and I have taken her work every day and given her nothing, and I knew what I was doing every day that I did it." He turned his hat around once. "I did it because my brother has been stealing out of that mill since '89, and I would rather have starved than seen the name in the newspapers, and I have found out this year what it is worth to save a name that way." Nobody said anything for a moment. The coal shifted in the grate. "And the drafts," said the Saginaw man. "Did you know about the drafts?" "I knew in September," said Merritt, "when my sister told me, in my own garden, with the whole of it, chapter and verse, and I told her it was a matter of bookkeeping." Foy stood up then and said several things, quickly, and I am not going to give them to you, because they were the ordinary things a man says in that position, and because none of them were said to a room that was listening. And at the end of it he turned to Ransom Dorrance, and I saw him decide to play the only card he had left, and he said, "Sir, this is a family matter, and I am now a member of your family. Mr." Dorrance looked at him for a long moment. "My daughter is a member of my family," he said. "You are a debtor of this bank." He took the spectacles off again, and I have never heard a room go so cold so fast. "Mr. Ordway, you have this morning caused 6 creditors to sit and hear how a hand was taken off a woman who has kept your book since you were a boy of 30 and used against her while she nursed her child through the scarlet fever. If you had come to me in '92 and said, 'I owe money in Detroit and I am frightened,' I would have found a way to carry you, because your father carried men and so do I. You did not. You went and got a pen." That is when Foy said the thing that finished him, and he said it to me, and he said it quietly, and I heard it clear across that table. "You could have signed the release," he said. "You could have kept your house." And I said the only line I said all day that I had planned. And I had had it ready since the 9th of August. And it came out of me as level as a shelf. "You spent a year learning my hand," I said, "and you never once thought to learn what was in my books." Then I sat down and I put my 2 hands in my lap, and I did not say another word. The meeting resolved 4 things before noon. The mortgage was renewed for a year on the security of the mill works and the North Timber, on the footing that the accounts of the concern were in the hands of Verna Halloway, and that the bank should have a quarterly statement over her signature. The 9 drafts were referred to the bank's attorneys with instructions to proceed. Mr. Kettering was to bring the codicil before the probate judge at the January term, and the 6 creditors were to appear in support of it, which I am told that county had never seen before and has not seen since. And a schedule was to be prepared of every dollar taken by Foy Ordway out of the concern since the 1st of January, 1889, to be charged against his quarter. There was no balance to owe. It swallowed the quarter and left $1,100 over. He was arrested at his father-in-law's house on the 18th of January and tried at the spring assize, and I sat in that courtroom for 4 days with my daughter beside me, and the piece of my evidence the newspapers all printed was the piece about the letter O. He was convicted on 3 counts of forging and uttering, and went to the state prison for 4 years, and Ransom Dorrance sat through every day of that trial in the 3rd row and never once looked at him. Clemmy went to her aunt in Toledo in the February and did not come back. I have never had one word of blame for that girl. Now, I promised you the whole of it, and there is a part of it I have to give you plainly, because I have heard people tell this story as though it ended in that room, and it did not. I got the office. The codicil was proved at the January term, and my name went on the door in the spring, and from that December until I gave it over to my daughter in 1912, the books of Ordway and Sons were kept by a woman whose own name was in the front of them. And I lost my brothers, both of them. Foy came out in 97 and went to Toledo and wrote me twice, and I did not answer, and he died there in 1904. Merritt kept the mill works and his quarter, and he ran that yard for me for 9 more years. And every morning at 7 he came into my office with his hat in his hand and gave me the numbers, and I wrote them down, and we did not, in 9 years, speak of the 12th of April, 1893, one time. He died in the winter of 1902, and I sat up with him the last 2 nights, and near the end he said, "Verna, the tomatoes," and I said, "I know." And that is the closest either of us ever came to it. Ottilie lived with us on Bell Street for 11 years after that, in the north room, and she and Nell Quill quarreled every day about the stove and were inseparable to the end of it. And Sylvie did not marry the money. She married a bridge engineer named Clay Vane in 1896, and she had 4 children, and she kept my books after me. I want to finish with the 5th of December, the day after that meeting, because that is the day I think of, and not the meeting itself. I came down the hill at 6 in the morning, the same as I had come down it for 11 years, past the drying sheds, in the dark, with the snow squeaking. I let myself into the office with my own key. I lit the lamp on the long table in the back room, and I took down the ledger for 1893, and there was a draft to be drawn that morning for $112 for a load of Babbitt metal and belting out of Saginaw. Because the mill was going to start up again on the Monday, and the mill needed belting. I ruled the line. I wrote the date and the amount and the purpose. And then I turned the draft around and picked up the pen, and I sat there for a good while with it in my hand, because for 11 years, the last thing I had done on any piece of paper that left that office was write another person's name. Then I wrote my own, Verna Holloway, and under it, because the bank would want to know in what capacity, I wrote, for Ordway and Sons. My hand shook on the H, and there is a blot on it, and that draft came back through the Kessel County Bank in the January, and I took it out of the returns, and I have it in this room tonight, in the front of the 1893 book, and it is the only piece of paper in this house I have ever put in a frame. They were right about one thing, my brothers. In our family, we did not count out shares like farmers along a fence line. We just let one person do all the counting for 20 years, and then told her she had no business in the room where the figures were read. Well, friends, that is where the story leaves us, and I have a question for you tonight. Merritt stood up in that room when he did not have to. And then he came into my office every morning for 9 years with his hat in his hand, and I never once said the words out loud to him. Do you think I should have forgiven my brother? Or do you think that what I did give him, which was 9 years of work and 2 nights at the end, was as much as anybody had a right to ask? Tell me what you think in the comments. I read every one of them. Thank you for staying with me all the way to the end of this one. There should be a playlist coming up on your screen with other stories from this channel, and I would be glad if you stayed a while longer with me tonight.